I'll tell you, a lot of that's because of Christianity. Religion does not poison everything.
If you need a Christian or religious reason to do what you ought to be doing anyway for your fellow creatures, it seems to me at best superfluous, and at worst perhaps slightly, just very slightly, I don't mean to denigrate anybody's humane work, slightly suspect. Why would you need an extra reason? Exodus says your people are allowed to kill anyone who stands in their way and enslave those who you don't kill, especially the virgins, for your own purposes, and take their land. And God's on your side doing that. We wouldn't be praising Dr. King if he had said that about Exodus. So let's agree, if we can, not to trespass too much on the public dimension of the soiree. The reasons for atheism, or as I would prefer to say, anti-theism, are, I would say, as follows. The first and the simplest objection to religious belief is that its metaphysical claims are not true, in fact are false, and come from a period that I would describe as the infancy, or the fearful childhood of our species, when, because we have brains that seek for information and seek for explanation, brains that even now prefer a conspiracy theory to no theory at all, and are bound to do so, and indeed in some ways a right to seek in this way, explanations had to be found for things that seemed at the time inexplicable. And in the absence of crucial information, we didn't know, we had no way to know that the Earth went around the sun. Didn't know that there was a germ theory that would explain disease. Didn't have any means of knowing that earthquakes were the result of living on the crust of a cooling planet in a rather odd solar system where most of the planets are either too hot or too cold to support life, and our own is in large part too hot or too cold to support it either, and where the remainder lives on a climatic knife edge, and always has. Some design, by the way, and that's just of one solar system. We didn't know that matters of this kind, earthquakes, waves, disasters, were not punishments. It was quite possible to listen to those and even to believe those who thought that they could explain. But for these people, a double problem arises. There is first the difficulty of, if not the impossibility, of demonstrating the existence of any creator or designer at all. I think I say something uncontroversial when I say that no theologian has ever conclusively demonstrated that such a designer can or does or ever has existed. The most you can do, by way of the argument from design, is to infer him or her or it from an apparent harmony in the arrangements. And this was at a time when that was the very best that, so to speak, could be done. But religion goes a little further than this already rather impossible task and expects us to believe as follows: that the speaker not only can prove the existence of the said entity, but can claim to know this entity's mind. In fact, can claim to know it quite intimately, can claim to know his or her personal wishes, can in turn tell you what you may do in his name. A quite large arrogation of power, you will suddenly notice, is being granted to the speaker here. The speaker can tell you that he knows, he cannot tell you how, but he can tell you that he knows, for example, that heaven hates ham, that God doesn't want you to eat pork products. He can tell you that God has a very, very strong view about with whom you may have sexual relations, indeed, how you may have sexual relations with others. He can indicate, perhaps a little less convincingly, but no less firmly, that there are certain books or courses of study that you might want to avoid or treat with great suspicion. Now, this suggests to me already a design. I think I can see a design shaping up here, and I think I can see who designed it and created it. I think it was man-made. I think the whole inference, because you can certainly see a design at work, is that this is human, that it was designed at a time of great distress and great ignorance, and that it had an enormous advantage, the design of which can be inferred from every one of its practices. It gives to people, ministers, priests, rabbis, shamans, whoever's cell phone that is should know that we know where you live, by the way, and where your children go to school. It gives to those people power in the here and now, the only place where it really counts. If you are His Holiness the Pope and you have arrogated to yourself, for example, the power to bind and to loose and to decide who may read what and how many tithes must be paid, how many holy days must be observed, how many disciplines must be followed, Are you seeking power in the hereafter, or are you seeking it now? It seems to me very obvious that, inescapable conclusion, that it's temporal power that's being talked about. And of a very dictatorial kind, I might add, an absolutist kind, a kind that is not open to the ordinary challenges. The divine right of kings was something you had to challenge not just at the risk of your life, which might end quickly, though the end itself would be slow and painful. The end would be final, but you were told you risked your immortal soul and the rest of your life too. That's quite a powerful instrument of secular discipline. And everyone can name their favorite example, I think, of how and where that kind of tyranny over the minds as well as the bodies of men was exerted. We think of it as belonging to our prehistory, but we only have to look as far as today's Iran, for example, to see a classic theocracy, a country from which I've recently returned, where I wondered how to convey sometimes the flavor of what theocracy really is like. Well, if you're a woman who gets in trouble with the regime and has committed a capital offense in Iran, but you're underage, you're a virgin, you may not be sentenced to death under the law of Iran, because the law forbids the execution of virgins. But you may be raped by the Revolutionary Guards so that you're no longer a virgin in the prison and then executed. I think that sort of conveys what people feel they're allowed to do when they think they have God on their side. And I could tell you far worse than that about what the arrogance of power is when it thinks it's backed by the divine. Well, this arrogation of power in the material world is really nothing compared to the dictatorship that is suggested by those who infer the whole celestial design that backs it. That's why I want to spend a moment or two telling you why I'm an anti-theist. You may be an atheist and wish that there was a God who loved you and took care of you. It's possible, but just to decide there isn't enough evidence for it. Just as Mr. Jefferson was a deist, but didn't believe in religion. He didn't think God intervened. These positions are equally compatible. I know several atheists who would happily say that they wish it were true, but that they can't find that it is believable. My own view is that it's very fortunate for us that it isn't true, and I shall say why. If there was a supervising creator who took a personal interest in your life, what you would have from the moment of your conception, at least in one interpretation, would be a permanent, inescapable, unchangeable, unalterable, unchallengeable rule, which would involve round-the-clock surveillance and supervision of every single waking and sleeping moment of your life. The abolition of any privacy in your life or even in your mind and your most private thoughts. The most complete form of totalitarianism ever imagined. And indecent, too, when you think of how many private moments would have to be supervised in this way and invigilated permanently. And that would go on not just for the rest of your life, as it would if you lived in Iran. It would go on after you died. In fact, after you died, the real invigilation would begin.
Religion was born in a world where people lacked better answers. Before germ theory, disease looked like punishment. Before modern geology, earthquakes looked like divine anger. Science gave us testable causes: bacteria, viruses, plate tectonics, climate, and biology. Religion gave men authority by claiming they knew God's private thoughts. The Bible even shows this control. Leviticus bans pork, Deuteronomy gives rules on sex, and Romans 13 tells people to submit to authority. That is not evidence. That is power wrapped in sacred language.
They'd only have started with you at the moment when you left this vale of tears. The two offers are, at that point, as you will know, at least from two of the leading monotheisms, either an eternity of praise and servility, everlasting praise and adoration of someone who has only done his job by creating you, hasn't been invited to do so, proposition that sounded more like hell to me when I first heard about it, or a very much more unpleasant one, derived not from the Old Testament but from the New. There's no hell in the Old Testament. There's genocide, there's racism, there's slavery, there's child mutilation, there's everything else you could wish for, but there's no punishment of the dead. Not until the the arrival of the gentle Nazarene, is it suggested that for a crime you probably were forced to commit, because after all, you're created a sinner. You're created sick and commanded to be well, the essence of the totalitarian principle. But for that, you might face an eternity of torture, to which there will be no end. Now, I think this is a horrible proposition. I think those who wish for it are wishing for slavery and servility, for the abdication of their own responsibility, for the dissolution of their minds, the abolition of their individuality. I'm therefore very glad to say that there is no evidence for it at all. We can relax. I've been to all three axis of evil countries, actually, in the last 4 years, including North Korea. I'm the only writer who can claim to have done this, and Iraq. And it took me a long time, but now I do know what it would be like. What the question is, how to answer the question I had when I was little, what would it be like to have to praise someone all the time, from the moment you got up till the moment you lay down again? And that would be your only right and your only recreation, and it would be the only culture that you had, because in North Korea that's what you get to do. In North Korea you can praise the dear leader and you can praise the great leader. The great leader and the dear leader are in fact the same person. They're reincarnations of each other according to the dogma. The place is only one step short of a trinity. The dear leader, who we lampoon, the little dwarf, is only the head of the party and the army, not of the state. His father's head of the state. Father's dead now, has been dead for some years, but he's still the head of the state and will be forever. North Korea is therefore what one might call, I tried to call, a necrocracy, or a mausolocracy perhaps, or a thanatocracy. And you have the right only to praise and adore and thank for every single thing that you get. You owe thanks to these people. That's what it would feel like. The most unending pointlessness, the most unending nothingness, nullity, smashing of the personality, destruction of everything that counts as self-respect or dignity. But at least you can die and get out of North Korea. And you cannot do this with Abrahamic religion, which I therefore renounce as something essentially evil. Now, one consequence of its man-made character, and one way of demonstrating beyond very much doubt that it is man-made, is its proliferation. We have, I think, two choices here. Either man-made God or God made man. If it's the former, nothing much remains to be explained. If it's God made man, it's very hard to see why there are so many religions and why they're constantly at war with one another. Make the opposite assumption that man has invented religion and God, nothing is left to be explained. There is no mystery. There are, of course, innumerable proliferating cults, sects, confessional discrepancies, warring churches, schismatic groups. Most of the violence in Iraq, as we know, is not directed at our own brave soldiers and their allies among Iraqis, but at other Iraqis by other Muslims, who think it's cultural to blow up each other's mosques, something a secularist would never agree to do, to blow up, say, the Golden Dome at Samarra. We know from pre-monotheistic times, we know from Sophocles and Antigone, that any person of ordinary morality has a natural resistance to desecration, to profanity. We wouldn't do that. They would leave it to the religious to do it, which you always can. The last time American troops were needed in a context like this, it was because the Christians of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Croatia were tearing each other's throats out, burning each other's churches, killing each other's children, all of it with a divine warrant, all of them, every last one of them, a faith-based. On that occasion, the Muslims were the most civilized people in the case. It doesn't make any difference. Almost everybody gets, as it were, their turn at bat to be the most intolerant among the religious. But to say that this is man-made, it seems to me to say something that's almost obvious. Now, I'm saying all this.
About a minute or so.
Okay, I'm saying all this in the United States, where I must now say something I've been waiting for months to say, actually years to say, my fellow Americans. Thank you. I sometimes think you don't understand how lucky you are. Yours is the country that has the only constitution ever written that absolutely insists on the separation of these ideas from the state. When the Baptists of Danbury, Connecticut wrote to Mr. Jefferson calling for a wall of separation, they were worried about what? Who did they think was going to persecute them? The Congregationalists of Danbury, Connecticut was the one they were afraid of. And rightly so, because the Congregationalists would have given them a really hard time if they'd been allowed to, if they could have seized any local power. This fighting, not just about religion, but between the religious, this desire to have the freedom not just of religion, but from religion, is enshrined in the founding documents of this country in a way that should make you very proud. And it should therefore put you very much on your guard that there are people who don't seem content with it, who seem always to wish to impose their own religious belief on this. To say, if only we could ban alcohol, as in the 20s, we'd have a more pure and perfect union. If only we could forbid the teaching of evolution, or get equal time for pseudoscience, like the alchemy class that follows the chemistry period in presumably these schools, or the astrology class that comes after the astronomy studies moment. Everything will be fine. Resist this with every fiber of your being. Join me, in fact, in my new favorite slogan. Mr. Jefferson, build up that wall. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Hitchens, thank you.
The doctrine of hell exposes the moral problem at the center of Christianity. A finite human life is judged with infinite punishment. The New Testament says the wicked go into eternal punishment in Matthew 25:46, and Revelation 20:15 describes people being thrown into the lake of fire. That is not justice. Justice requires proportion. A child can understand that endless torture for limited mistakes is cruel. Christianity calls humans broken from birth, then threatens them forever for failing a test they never agreed to take. That is moral blackmail dressed up as salvation.
Dr. Olasky, your move.
Well, I share Christopher's concern about round-the-clock surveillance, but I need to point out that we are in Texas and we tend to sing in almost a ritualistic fashion. The eyes of Texas are upon you. You cannot get away. You may think you can escape them. Rise up early in the morn. The eyes of Texas are upon you until Gabriel blows his horn. The religious sentiment there is something that a lot of us do believe in. In other ways, we have certainly a separation of church and state, although certainly not a separation of university and football. I'll rebut some of your specific statements later on, but I want to start with the big picture. When the second terrorist airplane on 9/11 hit the World Trade Center, ABC's Diane Sawyer was speechless for a moment, and then she uttered a soft, "Oh my God." And that, I suspect, is what a lot of us said, and the question is, are we crazy? I appreciate your guts in defending the war against terror. You've taken a lot of heat for that. I also appreciate your remarkable accomplishments in both speaking and writing. As for me, I'm just a writer. I really am. I've been in about 3 debates in 15 years. I tend to sit with my laptop and try to think things through, so I hope you'll all excuse me if I work off some notes here. I'm a writer, not a talker. And with a limited amount of time, I don't want to wing it. So let me start with a confession. When Evan here pushed me to take on this debate, I finally agreed, as you'll recall, but I predicted that Christopher would wipe the floor with me. But now, having read his book, having listened to him, I'm more optimistic. The change is not because of my oratorical ability. No, it's you know, my oratorical ability is minimal, but you have a weak case. And of course, some people motivated by religion have done all kinds of terrible mischief and mayhem. Of course, that's irrefutable. But then you go and insist in the subtitle of your book, and throughout it, that religion poisons everything. And that's a hard charge to prove, I think. Everything? Everything? It sounds improbable. Are 1.3 billion Muslims all murderers? Are 1 billion Hindus all nutty? Might Judaism and Christianity have produced maybe 50% good and 50% evil? If not, how about 45% good? Well, 40%, 30%, 20%? Will not Christopher relent from his anger if there's 10% that's good? I've gone page by page through this book. It's a delightful book to read, especially preparing for debate because of all the extreme statements. I could just lay it out page after page after page, but that would be a very dull presentation. There's also Texas wisdom, you know, if you don't strike oil within 20 minutes, stop boring. So I'm going to challenge just a few representative points. On page 4, Christopher, you write that religion produces a maximum of servility. All religions? With that enormous variety of religions in the world that you pointed out, do generalizations like that make sense? And just looking at the Bible, you read it through, where Abraham and Moses and David and Job, were they servile? I mean, they all argued with God at various times. They weren't servile. On page 7, you write that religion spoke its last intelligible or noble or inspiring words a long time ago. You know, Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches, with all their biblical imagery, were certainly inspiring. Many UT students, many students I had heard the Dalai Lama when he spoke here, and they were inspired. And Pope John Paul II's words inspired many people to rise up against communism in Eastern Europe. On page 17, you write that religion does not have the confidence in its own various preachings even to allow coexistence between different faiths. You know, there's an annual pro-life march in Washington, not far from your home. There are over 100,000 Catholics and Protestants every year. They walk side by side along with groups from Jews for Life, Buddhists for Life, and so forth. On page 32, you write that the 19 suicide murderers of New York and Washington and Pennsylvania were beyond any doubt the most sincere believers on those plains. Well, you know, Todd Beamer, the man who said, "Let's roll," on United Flight 93, and he and others made sure it didn't crash into the US Capitol. You know, he was a strong, sincere Christian believer. We did a profile of an interview with his wife and so forth afterwards in World Magazine, and the others who stopped the terrorists. There were a lot of believers there, and they died when Flight 93 crashed in Pennsylvania. Here go on. I'll skip to page 102. There you write that, quote, "It goes without saying that none of the gruesome, disordered events described in Exodus ever took place." Okay, without saying, none. A slam dunk. Next, page 103, all the Mosaic myths can be safely and easily discarded. Well, maybe they can be, but not easily. There are a lot of very thoughtful people who have spent years of their lives looking at it and trying to figure out what's going on there. On page 104, next page, all 5 books of Moses are an ill-carpentered fiction. Now, a lot of pronouncements like that were made back in the 19th century, particularly the late 19th century. But again and again, biblical accounts considered mythical have gained new archaeological support and respect. You know, scholars at one point back in the 19th century said that the Hittites described in the Bible did not exist, nor did rulers such as Belshazzar of Babylon or Sargon of Assyria. And of course, archaeologists now have recorded all those civilizations, those reigns. There have been lots of brilliant people who've spent their lifetime studying those writings that you so readily dismiss. Princeton's Robert Wilson, he knew 26 ancient languages and dialects. He could read just about all that remains from the ancient Near East. And he was impressed with the accuracy of those accounts that you so readily discard. You remind me, I admire your speaking and writing, you remind me of a character in the great movie, I hope many of us have seen it, The Princess Bride. There's a character, Vizzini. He's so smart that he says, "Have you ever heard of Plato, Aristotle, Socrates? Morons!" Well, you're a little too quick to dismiss some of these folks from the infancy of the human race. You know, great theologians, great historians, and sure, I mean, of course we know more about science and medicine and technology and lots of other things than people used to, but are we wiser than Socrates? Are we wiser than Isaiah? You write on page 160, "One knew, of course, that the whole racket of American evangelism was just that, a heartless con." You know that everything in American evangelism is a heartless con, a racket? I've been a reporter over the past 20 years. I've reported stories from around the country of people who, well, maybe or maybe not they're heartless, but they're evidently very stupid because they've spent their time in a racket that's yielded them no money. I mean, you live in Washington. You could easily visit some of these racketeers. You could drive for an hour or so north to Harford County, Maryland. It's north of Baltimore, just west of the Susquehanna. It's a land of forested rolling hills, leafy neighborhoods, small towns. They're, you know, playing a losing game of tug of war with the strip shopping centers and the malls and the fast food eateries and the housing developments. So it's pretty typical, sort of ex-urban area in some ways, but there's one small church in that county that I've gotten to know pretty well, Mount Zion has at least 30 families in it who have adopted kids, often hard to place kids. You could visit the home. It's easy. I'll be glad to arrange it for you. You could visit the home of one family, the Coonies. They own what was a 3-bedroom split level at the end of a cul-de-sac, nothing fancy, but now it has 7 bedrooms because the Coonies have adopted 9 kids. And most of those kids have some kind of mental or physical handicap. There's one who's 19, he has autism and mild mental retardation, severe bipolar disorder. There's one who was 16 and was set fire. He was born in Ghana and set fire there 10 years ago. She has daunting medical needs, but Terry Cooney said, God was so clear.
The weakest defense of religion is pointing to kind believers and calling that proof. Good people can do good things while believing false ideas. That does not make the idea true. Christians adopted children, helped the poor, and fought injustice. But human compassion does not prove heaven, hell, miracles, or a resurrected body. The same Bible used for charity was also used to defend slavery, silence women, and threaten outsiders. Religion keeps taking credit for human decency while dodging responsibility for the damage its doctrines create.
I mean, that's her racket, evidently, to take care of these kids. They have a 14-year-old Stephen who weighed only 2 pounds when he was born. He was born with cerebral palsy, and the Coonies adopted him. Their 11-year-old Isaac was the 6th child of a drug-addicted prostitute. They adopted him, and in every case they did it because of their Christian beliefs. So, does religion poison everything? There's no evidence for religion at all. Well, there's some evidence of what Christianity did in their lives, that they do this. And the Coonies could show you around, other people who are involved with this heartless con, this racket. There's another friend of mine in Mount Zion Church named Benedict Schwartz. He's the CEO of a software company, but he's left that now for, he's moving to Africa next month. He's already adopted a daughter. He wants to save some AIDS orphans in Africa. He began praying with a group of Mount Zion members about whether the church should found an orphan's home in Africa. And there were some folks who wanted the sanctuary to get air conditioning first, but the pastor agreed with Benedict that helping people in Africa was a higher priority. Now, 2 summers ago, my wife and I visited the outcome of that discussion. It's called the Children of Zion Home. It's in Namibia. We met the 50 children who live there. Most of them have lost at least one parent to AIDS. There are several, including, one boy who was living in a tire who were rescued from slavery. There were 2 deaf boys who had lived in the streets. There were 11 children, last count, who are known to carry the HIV virus. That orphanage would not exist except for Christian belief. Now, next month my wife and I will be back in Africa visiting another orphanage. This is the one that Benedict is moving to Africa to build in Zambia. And that's what one church has done. On the cover of this issue of World, this is a photo of a child that my wife and I met at a Christian work in South Africa. You could look at this kid and you could say, well, he's getting some food and it's to my knowledge, it wasn't poisonous food. He didn't drop dead. Tell him that religion poisons everything. You don't have to go to South Africa to see that. I mean, you live in Northwest Washington. You write books with this absolutist, you could almost call it a sort of totalitarian fundamentalist rhetoric in some ways of, hey, everything is exactly, I know everything about this and I know it's all a con. All you have to do is go a few miles to poverty-stricken Southeast Washington. You could visit, for example, the Children of Mine program in Anacostia. I've been there a few times. Hannah Hawkins she's invested 2 decades. She invested 2 decades in this. It's an after-school program. Kids go there. And she said that without Jesus, you're empty. You're just out to sea floating. You don't know where to go. And she gives her life for those kids. And there are efforts like this all around this country. I'm glad you're a citizen. I hope you get a chance to see some of these. If there are folks in the audience here who believe that religion poisons everything, which is what Christopher wants to tell us, you don't have to go to Maryland or Washington to see differently. I've driven down I-35 and visited with Freddie Garcia in his San Antonio home. He used to be an addict and he was a hater of white non-Hispanics. Then he became a Christian and started this program called Victory Outreach. He's led hundreds of people out of drug abuse. He counsels folks of all skin colors. You can't tell me that religion poisons everything. There are dozens of ex-addicts. I've interviewed them. They've told me that Christianity fought the poison that almost killed them. Or you or anyone here, you could drive east on 290 to Houston. You could visit the youth home that Kurt and Shelley Williams set up. These are also people I admire. They've helped to transform the lives of hundreds of teenagers who are heading into drugs and crime. They say, quote, we are unapologetically a Christ-based program. Or anyone here can drive up I-35. You can drive to Dallas. You can meet Christians who have set up community centers and former crack houses. Tell them that religion poisons everything. Tell that, I won't give you the whole tour, but, tell that to a gymnast in Indianapolis, a guy named Tim Street, lots of others there. Met a paraplegic weightlifter in Philadelphia named Nemo Cologne. Tell him that religion poisons everything. Religion saved his life. Tell it to a pastor named John Piper in Minneapolis. He and his congregation work with Hmong and Somali refugees there. Hey, this is a great country, Christopher. You're a citizen now, go see it. And you can reply that you've seen terrible things done for religious reasons. I believe you. I've seen terrible things done too. There are lots of religious things that poison some things. And maybe you'll tell me the subtitle was put there by your publisher over your objections, that you really don't believe that religion poisons everything.
Wouldn't say a thing like that.
Well, we'd be making progress, but, I don't know. I won't go on. The history of Christian poverty fighting in America. Before you say that religion poisons everything, okay, take the metro from your home, go over to the Library of Congress, read there about a fellow named Charles Brace. This was a guy in the mid-19th century. He was motivated by his Christian beliefs. He walked the streets of New York City and wanted to gain a personal understanding of the problems that orphans faced there. And over a 40-year period, he built lodging houses in New York City that provided shelter to tens of thousands of abandoned kids. He placed 91,000 of them in adoptive homes over a 40-year period. I'll tell you, one of the best days I've ever spent in research was at the Chicago Historical Society. I just spent a day reading the journals of a woman named Helen Mercy Woods. Again, motivated by her Christian beliefs, from 1881 to 1903, she ran a shelter in Chicago for pregnant and unmarried women. And you just read these journals. Month after month, she's giving attention to these women who had been discarded by their boyfriends or parents or anyone, and she helped them rejoice as their babies were born, and she helped some of them to get married, others to place their kids for adoption, others to get jobs. I could mention hundreds of more. I've written about this, but they weren't in an evangelical racket. Their Christian beliefs actually helped them to understand that there were a lot more things more important than money. There's another sector of American history. You mentioned the separation of powers. A lot of that is because of the Christian understanding early in American history that, in fact, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So you don't want to concentrate power. It's very different than Islam, which believes in concentrating power in caliphs, who are the religious and military and political heads. The whole idea in America, coming out of this Christian idea of sin, and lots of sin to go around, was that you spread it around. You don't concentrate power. You have a separation of powers. And that comes out of a Christian understanding. Or the whole reason that you and I can be independent journalists is because of Christianity. Until 1735 in this country, journalists had one job description: to make the king and his associates look good. If you wrote something negative about an important person, truth was no defense at all. In fact, truth made it worse. They had an expression: the greater the truth, the greater the libel. Because if you wrote something that was true, it was more likely that people would believe it. And if you were, in many ways, discouraging people to put all their faith in the king or royal governor, then you'd be thrown in jail. Truth was no defense at all. Seditious libel. In 1735 in New York, there was a Christian newspaper editor named John Peter Zenger who wrote that the governor was taking bribes and stealing land, which indeed he was. And so he ended up in jail. And then came the trial, and you can read the transcript of the trial. Zenger's lawyer appealed to the members of the jury by reminding them that biblical prophets had criticized the kings of their time. Zenger's defense essentially was, hey, if God's authors did this, so can Zenger. And the jury bought it. The jury declared Zenger not guilty. And that verdict reverberated through the colonies, and there wasn't a single prosecution for seditious libel after that. And, Christopher, you note on page 271 that you don't have to put up with any fatwas here. I'll tell you, a lot of that's because of Christianity. Religion does not poison everything.
Religious charity does not rescue Christianity from being false. A church can feed orphans and still teach claims that collapse under evidence. Helping children in Africa does not prove original sin, eternal punishment, virgin birth, resurrection, or answered prayer. People create hospitals, shelters, and recovery programs because humans can feel empathy and organize around need. Secular groups do the same without threatening people with hell or demanding belief. Christianity wants credit for compassion, but compassion existed before Christianity and survives perfectly well without it.
And there are others who have concluded this as well. I don't want to just talk about my research. I met a couple of weeks ago Bob Woodbury, who's an assistant professor in sociology here, and he sent me his dissertation that he wrote recently at the University of North Carolina. I hope it's published. because he describes how Protestant missionaries advanced education in British colonies because they wanted the people to read the Bible in their own language. And they created schools, they had mass literacy campaigns. And sure, I mean, you can look at missionaries who did harm, lots of it. But Woodbury shows, and he has lots of multiple regression analyses and all that good stuff, that evangelism, I'm quoting him here, evangelism by 1900 is by far the most constant predictor of modern elementary education all over the world with their British colonies. And that's part of an overall pattern. You can read historian Elizabeth Eisenstein. I mean, she's shown the Protestant Reformation led to a huge development of mass literacy in Europe. And Christians took the lead over the centuries in setting up hospitals. I mean, you can read the works of Jonathan Hill from your alma mater, Oxford, or Alvin Schmidt from Illinois, or Rodney Stark of Baylor. And they can show you the long-term effect of Jesus telling his followers to love their neighbors as themselves. And these writers, I mean, they're by no means propagandists, they're careful scholars. And, you know, your subtitle, How Religion Poisons Everything, compare that with the subtitle of one of Professor Stark's books. His subtitle is How Monotheism Led to Reformations, Science, Witch Hunts, and the End of Slavery. So the good and the bad. And that's a more balanced view, and that's what I hope you'll come to. I mean, this evangelical tendency, 1 minute, to help others, not poison them, continues today. Nicholas Kristof wrote in the New York Times that America's evangelicals have become the newest internationalists, fighting sexual trafficking in Eastern Europe, slavery in Sudan. There's a Jewish leader, Michael Horowitz, who gave me a call this afternoon. We were just talking about stuff, and he reminded me of what he had written to evangelicals. Here's what he wrote. You have led the way in taking on the slavery issue of our time, the annual trafficking of millions of women and children into lives of sexual bondage. You have led the way in organizing a campaign to end a growing epidemic of prison rape. As you define your human rights successes as central to who you are and what you've done, it will no longer be possible for those who fear your faith to crudely caricature you or ignore the virtue that Christian activism brings to American life and the world at large. And Michael spoke too soon, because despite all the evidence, Christopher, you write that religion poisons everything. You really don't believe that, do you? Everything? Thanks.
All right, 10 minutes. Mr. Hitchens.
Good, well, thank you.
Go get him.
Well, I would have thought it was too much to expect that this other speaker would have devoted all his remarks to me, too. I mean, they don't exaggerate when they say Texas hospitality. It's very kind of him to make me his special subject, but let me try and take some of his points in order. First, a very small one, the Diane Sawyer point. I think she did say that when she saw the second plane go in, but I've seen the film, the only film there is, of the first plane going in. It's rather harder to see, and so you get the first words that are said in the post-9/11 era, or the immediate post-atrocity moment. And those words are spoken by a man on a big fire truck in New York, where the camera is mounted. And he says, can you guess? Yes, you can. Holy shit. And that was exactly a correct description of what was going on. Much more accurate than Diane Sawyer calling on God, which even I will do when I've run out of words, or above all, concepts. Yes, of course I'll say thank God. What else is there to say? I'll say it, as a, if you like, as a courtesy, but don't over-attribute it. Now, had I said that philanthropy was poison, or charity was poison, I think you would have probably had me over a barrel. I say in my book, I give quite a lot of time to it, actually. I have a moment in Africa, in northern Uganda, where I was recently. I don't just sit in northwest Washington, as it happens, where I was doing the following thing. I was seeing the progress of probably the most cruel and horrible war, not just in Africa, but anywhere in the world, since, I should think, the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. I think it outpaces the Darfur War in its horror and cruelty, if not in its scale, for this reason. You've probably heard of the Lord's Resistance Army of northern Uganda, and of its terrible leader, Mr. Joseph Kony, who wants to impose the rule of the Ten Commandments on Uganda. He's a former altar boy, and whose army is made up of kidnapped children who are turned into zombies and sadists at a very young age and sent out to kidnap other children to replenish the ranks. And there's a real evil to this because, of course, even the Acholi tribe, the people who suffer most from this ghastliness, don't want very rigorous measures taken against this terrifying little army of children for fear that their own kidnapped children will be killed. So it's a sort of double indemnity. And it's enormously retarded the recovery of Uganda in the name of God. And though it's a Christian force, very explicitly so, Its paymasters are actually the Sudanese murderers who've commissioned the genocide in Darfur because they want a revenge on Uganda for Uganda's help for the South Sudanese Liberation Army. So it's all a wonderful faith-based nightmare down there. And I was sitting in a camp where these children are gradually, some of them come in and give themselves up, some of them are captured, some of them get lost and are picked up. Terrifying children with guns and eyes of stone, who've learned so much about cruelty in such a short time that it shrivels your heart, being rehabilitated. And the people doing this were rather fundamentalist, but very decent Christian group. Can't remember exactly which, the World Forum something. And I was sitting with the man who ran it and said, well, I'd like to ask you a question. I said, as an unbeliever, which of you do you think is the most sincere Christian? I mean, here's Mr. Coney, who really goes out and fights like an Old Testament man and says he's going to impose the law of his tribe and his people and his teachings on everyone. And he wants the 10 Commandments and nothing else. And there's you. And you're doing what any secular group could do. I mean, Amnesty International could be doing what he was doing. Not Amnesty International, in fact, but you know what I mean. Human Rights Watch, in fact, in Uganda is doing that and much more. And I know literally hundreds of secular missionaries and human rights workers who do what they do for its own sake, not to proselytize for a church or witness for a faith. Actually, to my surprise, the man took the question very seriously. He said, I often asked it myself. I don't know which of us is the real Christian. I have no means of knowing. Maybe it's Joseph Coney, maybe it's me. Well, you see, my case is the following. There really couldn't be another answer to that, because if you need a Christian or religious reason to do what you ought to be doing anyway for your fellow creatures, it seems to me at best superfluous, and at worst, perhaps slightly, just very slightly, I don't mean to denigrate anybody's humane work, slightly suspect. Why would you need an extra reason? Hope I'm making myself plain here. Could it be proselytization? It very often is. Could it be the feeling that you yourself will get an eternal reward for it? Well, you're supposed to. Secularists who undertake this kind of work can't be suspected of this kind of thing, nor of trying to win converts. It seems to me it's an optional belief. By all means have it. What you've said is being done by any of the people you've mentioned is being done by religious Jews on the West Bank, though they want to bring on the Messiah and Armageddon and bring about the end of the world, and by Muslim groups everywhere. In fact, Hamas it justifies its whole rule in Gaza, a disgusting dictatorship that it is, by its provision of social services to the poor, the needy, or, as Mother Teresa would always put it, the poorest of the poor. That's exactly their justification. The same is true of Hezbollah in Lebanon. If you allow it once, you allow it for everybody. It isn't an argument. It's barely even an observation. And when I said about evangelicals, I meant to say, and I said about a very revealing film which you may have seen about Marjo Gortner, the little boy who was put onto the preaching circuit by his parents. His name is an anagram of Mary and Joseph, and became one of the biggest tent draws around the country, a national superstar, while his life was ruined and exploited by these gruesome parents. And I don't know how it is then. There's a film made about it that everyone ought to see who's interested in this business. And if what I say is untrue about the racketeering nature of this business, why is it I only have to set my watch when I see someone like the Reverend Haggard, and I can tell you exactly when and how I'm going to see him in the news again?
The missionary argument falls apart fast. Yes, some churches built schools and hospitals. So what? Useful work does not make the theology true. The same religious language can inspire a nurse, a missionary, a cult leader, or a warlord. That is the problem. Christianity has no reliable filter that separates compassion from fanaticism. One believer says God wants mercy. Another says God wants obedience, punishment, or holy war. If a belief system can be used to heal a child and also justify terror, then the credit belongs to human decency, while the danger belongs to the doctrine.
Why is it the case with these Chaucerian frauds, from Oral Roberts to, I can't remember, even their names give them away, onto the crack of doom, that it seems to be that it isn't actually Christianity that motivates it, but I don't blame Christianity for it either. Any more than many, many orphanages that have turned into rape rooms for clerics, with no child's behind left, as I like to phrase it. I don't say that's the fault of Christianity. I just say it proves to you that those who run orphanages say nothing and prove nothing about their religion. Now, to the point about Dr. Martin Luther King that you make, you skipped over the chapter I wrote about that too. If Dr. King, who was accused all his life and followed by the FBI on the proposition, you will remember, and denounced by its leader and by many others, for what he did in fact do, keeping company with secularists and socialists and leftists. You should remember this very well. We were all on the same side in those days. People like, not just people like Bayard Rustin and A. Philip Randolph, the great black secularist union and socialist organizers who actually organized the March on Washington, but people more to the left than that, people in the Communist Party who, to their credit, did a great deal of work for civil rights. What does that say, the bravery of the Communist Party in the South, about communism? Nothing. It doesn't alter the fact that communism is a religion of slavery, does it? And Dr. King didn't preach Exodus. He preached the metaphor of Exodus. He said, my people should be let go and allowed their place in a promised land. Exodus says, your people are allowed to kill anyone who stands in their way and enslave those who you don't kill, especially the virgins, for your own purposes, and take their land. And God's on your side doing that. We wouldn't be praising Dr. King if he had said that about Exodus. If he'd taken that as his text, we would be thinking of him as a delusional, racist demagogue, which is why it is such a good thing that Israeli archaeology, that is a pretty sophisticated group of people they are to at that school, which has tried its natural hardest. You can believe they've tried their best to find any evidence at all for the wandering in Sinai or for the Exodus or for the original Jewish presence in Egypt. Cannot find a single shard of it. It's entirely fabricated, and we should be grateful for that fact.
About a minute, Mr. Hitchens.
All right. Can I have two? Just because I want to do a riposte.
Yes, of course.
And I want it to be ad hominem.
Absolutely. The ad hominem are the better.
Because I've also read some of Mr. Olasky's work. He may even remember my review of his book on presidential morality. It just expresses a worldview difference between us. I just feel one mustn't let that go. In writing about presidential morality, Dr. Olasky says that George Washington won the Revolutionary War because in the ranks of the Continental Army, cursing and drinking were forbidden, whereas in the ranks of the British Army, I've got to tell you, cussing and boozing was sort of rife. And I think your words, if I remember them correctly, I haven't had a chance to look them up, were godly policies brought forth victory. Now, here's the difference between us. I do not believe that God intervenes in human affairs. And I think it's rather profane. In fact, I think it's disgraceful to suggest that he does, especially when it's on your side. I will comment only that first, probably the Revolutionary War was won by the French Army and Navy, came in on our side at the crucial moment, in which I'm very sorry to say there was a good deal of boozing and expostulation. Second, Thomas Paine, certainly the most famous brandy drinker in American history, wrote the relevant documents that were read at Washington's order to the troops to stiffen the morale at Valley Forge, and carried a musket himself, soaked in the sauce as he was. Third, that my former fellow countrymen, smashed as they were and full of rude words, still managed to hold on to Canada, India, most of Africa, Australia, New Zealand, still cursing and boozing away, and beat every other army put into the field against them for many years afterwards, from China to Peru. Be very careful when you talk about virtue, of whatever kind it is in the world, human virtue, precious enough as it is. Be very careful not to degrade such examples of virtue and courage as we have by associating them with the supernatural. They don't require this defense. They may well suffer from it, and they will make the speaker look foolish. Thank you.
All right. Dr. Olasky.
Well, I don't mind the ad hominem attacks. I do mind the failure of memory. And I don't recall your review of that, but if it was based on...
Maybe one of those that I never mailed off. I did it just for pleasure.
If it was a review similar to what you've just said about the book, then I don't think... You must have read some other book. Because, of course, the French Army and Navy, of course, Thomas Paine, of course. And anyway, but we could discuss that some other time.
Well, have you got the book? Because I would actually purely love to test my memory on this.
So, good.
You didn't say godly policies brought victory to George Washington?
No. Godly policies, I think, were what George Washington put into practice. But by itself, brought victory? No. I mean, there were things like guns and cannon and stuff like that that were important. Anyway.
It's not how I remember it.
But, okay, getting back to the main point here. You have a weak case. What I'm trying to do is just say that we could have a reasonable discussion on the good stuff that people of religion do, of various religions, the bad stuff, and Maybe it's 60-40, maybe it's 70-30, maybe it's this, we could discuss that. But what you insist on is that religion poisons everything. So
Yes.
100% evil, 0% good. And that, I think, is just a very weak case. You take anything that's good, like the charity that people do for religious reasons, and say, well, it's not religious. Well, you could fool the people who are doing it. We could get into a long discussion of MLK Jr., but his group was called the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And of course he worked with secularists and he worked with Marxists and so forth. He also worked with lots of Christians. So, let's not just be so one-sided, 100% this, 0% that. I mean, he worked with lots of different people. But I do know for sure one bad thing that some Christians have done. Somewhere along the way, they gave you a misapprehension of what the Bible's all about. Maybe you learned that the Bible's a book of rules, so if Mr. Coney with his army in Uganda says, I'm going to have certain rules, that makes him a Christian. I mean, we've reported on that. I mean, he doesn't have any sense of what Christianity is all about, what we should do and what we should not do. If you think if it's a book of rules, then you've been misinformed. Sure, the Bible has some rules that show us how the world works, but the Bible is not mainly about rules and what we should do. It's about what God has done. And, since you seem to have missed this, I can just give a quick summary. The Bible says God created the world. It was very good. It wasn't perfect. The very good apparently wasn't good enough for human beings who sought what they thought was perfection. And so here's the history, which you may say is all fable, but some say it's history. There's a renegade angel named Satan who tempted the humans to rebel. And Adam and Eve first fell for Satan's lies, and the world changed. It's not very good anymore. Evil exists in our hearts. Decay mars the whole creation. Death's come into the world. We all know that. The Bible story is not about X number of commands. It's about what God did after evil came into the world. He was not content to let the world decay and rot. And even as he pronounced the consequences of sin, he made a promise that one day there'd be a special human being who would outwit and defeat Satan, that the earth would one day be restored. And the rest of the Bible is a story of how that works out. Now, first, God forms a people and protects them against enemies. They sometimes fight wars, but they survive. They keep messing up. He doesn't abandon them. He shows this people his character. He teaches them about evil and need for sacrifice. He shows them their inability to keep the law. They keep messing up. Committing spiritual adultery is the expression that's used, but God never abandons them. They're often unlovable, but he often loves them. He always loves them. So it's a story of love and rescue, of promise and deliverance, of the blind, the lame, the lost being plucked to safety by a Redeemer. It's a love so terrific that God sacrifices his own son to make redemption possible for these people. Now, you may say this is total nonsense or so forth. You may say that Christians have done ugly things. Absolutely. Many non-Christians have done wonderful and charitable things, and there's plenty of sin to go around. There's good stuff to go around. But here's the point. Sin still exists in the hearts of man. It's in your heart. It's in my heart. Until Christ comes again, creation still groans, but we do see glimmers of the promised redemption. And, the Coonies, when they adopt these 9 kids, we see examples of self-sacrificial love and tastes of undeserved kindness, glimpses of holiness. That's what the Bible's about.
The final Christian defense is always a story. Creation, sin, Satan, rescue, redemption. But a story is not proof. The fall of Adam does not match science. Humans evolved over hundreds of thousands of years, and death existed millions of years before humans ever appeared. So the whole setup collapses. No Adam, no inherited fall. No inherited fall, no need for blood sacrifice to fix it. Christianity asks people to accept guilt from an ancient myth, then calls obedience love. That is not truth. That is control with better branding. So here's the question. If Christianity needs fear, inherited guilt, and supernatural punishment to make its message work, is it really moral? Comment your thoughts below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want us to continue, comment more Hitchens.